Welcome to Harry Potter x Daphne Greengrass. I'm what? Daphne Greengrass nearly shouted. She was sitting in the study of her family's home staring in pure shock at her mother and father, who had just revealed a great family secret. Daphne had the shiny silken blonde hair of her mother, as well as the same smooth, cream-colored skin. But her eyes were the same intense brown as her father's. At nearly 16 years old, she was developing into a very beautiful woman. She was of average height and had a slender feminine build. Her chest was ample, and her legs were stunning. She had often heard boys comment on her backside as being one of their favorite attributes. Daphne Greengrass was most definitely one of the most attractive girls in all of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. She was home for the summer holidays after finishing her 5th year at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, a year that had been dubbed by many as the Year of the Toad. Though she had kept her head down, and never suffered any punishment at the hands of Dolores Umbridge, Daphne had heard many horrible stories about Umbridge's terrorist-like tactics. Daphne was a part of a very small group of Slytherins that chose not to agree with the pure blood agenda, or support the Dark Lord Voldemort. They had to remain quiet with their beliefs or they might be chastised, or beaten up, or worse. Slytherin House had its reputation for many reasons, and Daphne did not want to be one of the victims. So she had worked hard to establish a reputation for being cold and distant. She was known throughout the school as the Ice Queen. She had been home for 2 weeks when her mother and father called her to the family library and gave her the news that would alter everything in her life. "You are betrothed." Mr. Greengrass repeated his statement. "Since you were born, in fact. Your grandfather had." "How is this possible? To who? Why?" Daphne asked frantically, cutting off her father. "Not long after you were born, your mother and I entered into a marriage contract with a very influential family at your grandfather's urging. He had promised that you would be very well taken care of, and the union would benefit our family greatly," Mr. Greengrass explained. He looked at his daughter, recognizing the panic and growing anger in her eyes. She was obviously uncomfortable, but he and his wife had made the decision to tell their eldest daughter of her fate. "Daphne," Mrs. Greengrass said softly, hoping to comfort the 15-year-old. "We're telling you this now because you're about to turn 16. If you haven't noticed boys by now, the point is that we thought that you could spend some time over the next 2 years and get to know your future husband. Perhaps you could even learn to what? Fall in love? Have a happy, fairy tale life." Daphne shivered. "How could you do this?" "We did it for you. We were trying to make sure you'd be well taken care of." Mr. Greengrass tried. "You did it for yourselves. Just like everything else. You found a way to fill your pockets, and gain some more power in our world. So tell me, what family did you auction me off to? The Knots? The Flints? Oh Merlin, please don't let it be the Malfoys." "The Malfoys? I'd sooner boil my own head in shite before I allowed you to even date that pretentious ponce. Do you really think I would ally this family with Lucius Malfoy and fall to my knees in front of that terrorist?" Mr. Greengrass spluttered. "I may have signed a marriage contract for you, but give me a little credit. I said you'd be taken care of, not paraded around like a show pony." "We all need to calm down," Mrs. Greengrass said firmly, laying a hand on her husband's shoulder and looking kindly at her daughter who had folded her arms across her chest in defiance. "Daphne, you have not been promised to Malfoy, or not?" "Then who?" Daphne demanded. "Harry Potter," her father said after a long pause. The silence that fell was deafening. Daphne could only look at her mother, who looked saddened, and her father, still scowling over Daphne's outburst. Daphne tried several times to say something, but her mouth only opened, a strange strangled noise would come out, and she would close her mouth again. After several minutes of silence, Daphne rose up out of her chair slowly, unsure if her legs would support her, and she left her parents in the study. "Well, at least she didn't try and curse you," Mrs. Greengrass said gently as she patted her husband's shoulder. "How could she think we'd even think of aligning with the Malfoys? She knows very well how I feel about that man. Give her time to process it all, my love. She's just been told she's engaged to the boy who lived. That's a lot for a 16-year-old girl to process at once. Do you think we did the right thing by telling her? You know as well as I what would happen if we waited. This way she has a chance to form some kind of relationship with the boy. If he's anything like we've heard, she may even. Let's just hope they can find some kind of common ground. You know as well as I that when we signed that contract we doomed her. Time will tell, my love. Time will tell." Mrs. Greengrass smiled her secret smile, staring at the door her eldest daughter had left through. Daphne closed the door to her bedroom softly and sat in front of her vanity, staring hard into the large mirror. Her life had just been thrown so far off track that her head was still spinning with all of it. There was too much to think about to focus on any one thing. She was betrothed to the savior of the wizarding world. Harry Potter. She whispered to herself. Of all the boys in the school, in the world even, why him? The Gryffindor golden boy, the Triwizard champion, the freaking boy who lived. The bane of nearly every Slytherin's existence. The one person who Slytherins loathed above all others. Daphne Greengrass was contractually obligated to marry the boy, and she had never even spoken a single word to him, not even to insult him. Did he even know? Was it possible Harry Potter had no idea they were to be married one day? Knock knock. Daphne turned to see her only friend in the entire world, Tracy Davis, poke her head in the doorway. In all the travesty, Daphne had forgotten that Tracy was arriving today so they could spend 2 weeks together. They did it every summer, 2 weeks at the Greengrass Manor, and then 2 weeks at the Davis Beach home. Tracy was a bit taller than Daphne, with shoulder-length straight auburn hair, which she often tied in a loose ponytail. Her eyes were sparkling blue, and her face was rarely seen without her mischievous smile. Unlike Daphne, Tracy was more forward and she spoke her mind, often without thinking about what she said. "Your folks said you were up here and I should just come up," Tracy said in her cheeriest voice. "Your mom seemed a little distracted, though." "Oh, I'm so glad to see you," Daphne said as she ran over to hug her friend. "How's your holiday been?" "Not so bad, actually. My brother was home for a bit, and he brought me presents, so of course I was happy to see him." Tracy laughed. Daphne helped her friend with her bags and the two friends and Slytherin housemates settled on Daphne's bed to catch up. Tracy talked about things going on at her home and what her brother had been up to. He worked for a private treasure company as a curse breaker. He'd been offered a substantial amount of gold to come to work for Gringotts, which he'd accepted. So he'll be home for another month and then he's going to Egypt. He says it'll be better than traipsing about Romania. So, what about you? Has Astoria been her typical pain in the arse this summer? Tracy asked. Actually, she's been holed up in her room writing letters. I think she's got a girlfriend, Daphne remarked casually. So you're still sure she plays for the other team? Tracy grinned. I'm positive. And I don't care. So long as she's happy, and leaves me the hell alone. I have enough problems as it is. Daphne grimaced. Why, what's going on? Tracy asked worriedly. Not still sending you love letters. That I could handle. I simply trip near the fireplace and it falls in, burning before I can read it. Oh no. Daphne feigned hurt and despair. No, this problem is a little bigger. She took a breath before continuing. I'm betrothed. Daphne said quickly, as if ripping off a band-aid. Her nearly lifelong best friend just stared blankly for a long moment before a smile began on her face. And people say you have no sense of humor. You almost had me. How long have you been cooking that one up? Tracy giggled. I wish it were a joke. My parents just told me that they signed a marriage contract when I was a baby. Seriously? Tracy's smile melted away. This isn't some really bad prank. You have no idea how much I wish it was. And it gets worse. What? Did they promise you to Malfoy? Tracy asked, still shocked by the revelation. No. That would be life-ending. You'd be talking to my corpse hanging from the rafters if that were the case. No, my future husband is none other than Harry Potter. Daphne said. Tracy nearly fell off the bed they were sitting on in awe. Tracy regained her balance with a little help from her friend and tried repeatedly to say anything. Daphne thought Tracy looked like a fish out of water, her mouth opening and closing with no sound, and her blue eyes bugged out in dismay. The Gryffindor golden boy? Tracy finally asked when her power of speech returned. How lucky can you get? Lucky? I'm betrothed to a boy I've never even spoken to. A boy who is hated above all others in our house, and the #1 target on you-know-who's hit list. Have you not been paying attention these past 5 years? He gets in more trouble than any other person on earth. Okay, yeah, all good points, but let's not forget he's one of, if not the most attractive boy in school. He's fairly smart, humble. You never hear him brag about himself, nor does he use the pity card. The pity card? Daphne asked, looking at her friend oddly. Oh, poor me, my parents are dead, and you know who is out to get me. That's not how the prophet wrote him. And we all know why. They were trying to hide the truth about. I know. I know. You could do worse. Is this really so bad? He's supposed to be loaded. Why should that make any difference? Daphne asked indignantly. I don't know. I just thought it might be a factor. If he's so rich, why does he dress like a pauper? Is he trying to make some kind of new fashion trend? Homeless beggar. How am I supposed to know? Besides, you never cared how rich a boy was. Why now? I don't care. You brought it up. I just don't want to be betrothed to him. I don't want to be betrothed to anyone. I'm not even 16 yet. When is the marriage supposed to happen? Tracy asked. I don't know. I walked out before my parents could finish. I was too overwhelmed by it all. I thought marriage contracts were a thing of the past. I can't believe my parents would take part in such a horrible custom. What did they say about it? Get this, they were just looking out for me. Daphne huffed. It's possible they were. Tracy observed. Possibly, But I know my father. If he signed a marriage contract, he's getting something out of it. So what are you going to do? Tracy asked her best friend, who looked sad and scared. I don't know. I suppose I'll have to talk to Potter. Chances are really good that he doesn't know anything about this mess. With his parents dead, I don't know if anyone else would know about it to tell him. Oh, that poor boy. Tracy giggled. Promise I get to be there when you drop the bombshell. I want to see the look on his face when he finds out that the Ice Queen is to be his wife. He might die before you know who gets his claws into him. Daphne shrugged. Oh, wow. Tracy sobered. I forgot about that. He's pretty much marked for death. Did your parents consider that? Can they break the contract because of that? I don't know. Seems like it should be possible. It seems like it would be smart to have some sort of clause to break it, in case something goes wrong. One party goes to Azkaban, or something. Let's go ask. Daphne said hopeful. The two girls found Daphne's father in the study, poring over paperwork, most likely regarding the family's wealth, some new law that the Wisengamot wanted to pass, or any number of offers of alliance to other ancient families. Her father was often approached to join with another family to support or oppose something or other. Jonathan Greengrass was a very good politician, though he held no office. He had followed in his own father's footsteps and kept the Greengrass family neutral, working in the private sector, investing in many wizarding businesses. It had ensured the family's survival through one war, and now he hoped to repeat his previous success. Father, Daphne said tentatively. I have some questions. Daphne fell into her Ice Queen persona as easily as slipping on a coat. In this persona she was firm, and businesslike. She had noticed her father had the same sort of act when he had to deal with business associates or politicians. She always figured it was from him that she learned to protect herself behind her mask of frigid standoffishness. I thought you might. Come, sit down. Hello, Tracy. Mr. Greengrass said easily. Hello, Mr. Greengrass. Tracy smiled politely as she sat next to her friend across from Mr. Greengrass, who sat behind a large oak desk. Ask your questions. Mr. Greengrass directed his eldest child. When is this marriage supposed to happen? Daphne began without any preamble. The contract stipulates that the marriage must happen within 1 year of your graduation from Hogwarts or no later than your 19th birthday. There are no clauses regarding children. This was mostly for political alignment. The reason we told you now was so you would have a chance to get to know the boy. In most arranged marriages, the participants do not even meet until their nuptials take place. Consider yourself lucky. We know quite a bit about him already. Tracy said. Oh, are you friends with the boy? Mr. Greengrass asked, a suspicious eye cast upon the auburn-haired girl. His tone was sarcastically firm. Tracy actually shrank under the man's unwavering gaze. Not really, she nearly squeaked. Then you only know what you've heard about him. Rumors and bad articles in the Prophet are not good ways to measure a man. You can only know him by talking to him, and spending time with him. Especially a teenaged boy. They never truly show you who they are until you've spent significant time together. We men have fragile egos, and so we often hide our true selves away. Is there any way out of this? Daphne asked, changing the subject. Potter is number one on he who must not be named's list. If I become chummy with Potter, you know who might come after me. Not to mention that I have no interest in being forced into marriage. Mr. Greengrass steepled his fingers and rested his chin upon them. He looked hard at his firstborn, sighing quite deeply. When the contract was signed, there was no threat upon the boy's life. That came after. The only stipulation that would have ended it was if he had died, or you had died. It was ironclad, Daphne. It is magically binding. You and Harry Potter must be married by your 19th birthday. We have no choice now. If his parents were still alive, we may have spoken to them. We may have been able to come to some agreement that would allow you both to walk away from it. But since they are no longer with us, we simply must move forward. Can't you just tear it up? Daphne asked, her Ice Queen mask falling away with her rising desperation. No, not without the agreement of his parents. They were the ones who signed it with us. If we tried to nullify it on our own, there would be serious consequences. That includes death, Mr. Greengrass said with finality. Daphne sighed and looked to her best friend, who looked just as frightened and anxious as Daphne felt. Thank you, Father, Daphne said as she rose from her seat. You've given me much to think on. Daphne, do not think of this as some sort of imprisonment. We did this to help you. We did this for your future. We did this at a time where people were dying and losing everything. I know that you believe it was for our own gain, but it wasn't. We gained virtually nothing from this. I would very much like to see this contract for myself, Daphne said firmly, hands on her hips. She thought she saw her father give a small shiver, which made her smile inside. Just like her mother, Daphne could make her father bend to her will with but a look. Her mother was far better at it, but Daphne knew one day she'd be able to apply the same principle to her own husband one day. That thought made her shiver a little herself. Then it would be wise to speak to Potter on this matter. The contract is in the Potter family vault. Only he can access it? Her father gave a knowing smile. That seems odd, Tracy uttered. Why wouldn't you have a copy? We did. Mr. Greengrass bowed his head towards the paperwork he was looking at when the girls arrived. It burned up in my father's house the night he was killed. Daphne and Tracy excused themselves politely. The two teenage girls went back up to Daphne's room, where the blonde girl threw herself on her bed and screamed all of her frustration into her pillows. Tracy sat down and gently rubbed her friend's back. He pretty much guaranteed you have to talk to him now, didn't he? She asked. Her blonde friend nodded her head, which was still buried in her pillows. So what are you going to do? Daphne sat up and looked to her best friend. She had tears forming in her large brown eyes and she sniffled lightly. I really don't know. I know nothing about him. That's not true, Tracy said vehemently. You know that he won the Tri-Wizard tournament. We know that he's the best flyer on a broom in the entire school. He's wealthy, though we don't truly know how wealthy. He's lousy in potions, and Snape hates him, while Dumbledore and the rest of the school seems to worship him. I don't know that the rest of the school worships him. There's a definite split as to worship and loathe. Tracy smiled. We know he's got his own fan club, led by Ginny Weasley, though he is most likely unaware of it. In fact, he seems oblivious to a lot of things. You'd think he'd know more about our world than he seems to. We have nothing in common. Except that you're going to be married. Tracy added. Not helping. Daphne glared. Wasn't trying. Tracy winked. You're supposed to be my friend. Help me. Daphne pleaded. Tracy laughed and shook her head. I will help you. I'll be right there when you tell him, and I'll be right there when you say I do. Tracy laughed hard, and received a pillow to the side of her head. Tracy continued to laugh as Daphne stood up and went to her window. Tracy could see her friend was not enjoying this, and decided to cool it. She stood up and went to her friend. Daphne, look. You're in a bad situation, but it could be a good thing. Maybe, just maybe, Potter is who you're meant to be with. Who's to say that without the stupid marriage contract you two wouldn't have ended up together anyway? Just because you've never spoken to him in school, and may never have, doesn't mean that a few years down the road you wouldn't bump into him in Diagon Alley and sparks wouldn't fly. You have to admit, he's quite good looking. The fact that he's Malfoy's enemy is a plus as well. Daphne seemed to think it over for a few minutes before nodding slowly. Maybe. She said softly, still staring out her window. So what do you want to do? Tracy asked. Well, it seems that I'm trapped in this. So I suppose I have very little choice. I'm going to have to speak to Harry Potter on the train to school. Harry Potter sat under a tree in the Weasleys' yard. It had been a rather interesting holiday so far. Though it had started off grimly with the death of his godfather, Sirius Black, Harry had learned quite a bit about his predicament. He'd learned that he was being hunted by the Dark Lord, Voldemort, because of some prophecy made by his baddie divination teacher 16 years ago. He'd learned that Dumbledore, a man he'd looked up to, had made a great many mistakes in regard to Harry's well-being. Harry sat under the shade of the tree, thinking about the last conversation he'd had with the Hogwarts headmaster, the night he'd arrived at the Burrow. It had all began when Dumbledore arrived at Privet Drive late that evening. He had invited himself into the Dursley home, and gathered them all in the sitting room, where he told them that Harry would be returning for a very short time the following summer, and that Harry nor the Dursleys would see each other again unless they chose to. Harry had felt a rush of deep relief at this news. The Dursleys had never been kind to him in all the time he'd lived with them. He'd been a slave for them, doing yard work, cooking meals, and barely getting any food himself. Then, after he'd started going to Hogwarts, they become fearful of him, though never truly stopping their mistreatment of him. Then, to Harry's great surprise, it was revealed that Sirius Black, his late godfather, had willed him nearly everything left in the Black family estate. Dumbledore said that Harry could find out all about it later, and that it mattered little now. The only thing that mattered was if Harry could truly inherit it all. You see, you are not related by blood, and as such, the magic that bonds the estate may not be allowed to fall to you. It may go to the next male heir in the Black family, that would of course be Draco Malfoy. However, there is one simple test that will answer this for us. The headmaster had said. What do I do? Harry had asked. You must call Creaker to you. If he comes, then we will know for certain if you are now the rightful owner of the Black family estate and all its holdings. Harry nodded once and then called out clearly, Creaker, come to me. There was a long pause in which nothing happened, and the suddenly a loud pop, and the ancient, withered elf lay upon the floor, slamming his fists and kicking his feet. Creaker does not want to belong to the Potter brat. Creaker does not wish to serve him. Creaker wants to serve the noble Malfoy. Creaker. Shut up. Harry spat scornfully. Instantly Creaker silenced, though he continued to kick and writhe upon the floor like a toddler throwing a tantrum. Well, that settles it. Congratulations, Harry. We have solved one major problem this evening. Well then, if you are all packed, we shall leave these people in peace. Dumbledore said, gesturing to the Dursleys who were watching the actions of the strange creature on their floor. Headmaster? What do we do with Creaker? Well, he is your elf. What would you have him do? Harry thought carefully over this dilemma. He truly did not want the wretched elf in his presence, as it was a constant reminder of his loss. Then an idea struck him. Sir, would it be acceptable for Creaker to work at Hogwarts? I dare say it would. We can always use more help, and the other elves would keep a close eye on him. Creaker, you are to report to the Hogwarts kitchens, and you will work there until I call for you. You will speak to no one, nor will you send any messages. Harry said sternly to the distraught ancient elf. Creaker glared at Harry for a long moment, his eyes cold with hatred, before popping away. Harry felt contempt for the elf, but he couldn't think of what he might do with him. Sending him to Hogwarts had been a temporary solution at best. Harry rushed upstairs and gathered up all his belongings. He had already sent Hedwig off to the Weasleys. When he made it downstairs, Dumbledore flicked his wand and Harry's trunk and Hedwig's cage vanished. They shall await you at the Weasley home. Now, we must be off. Harry waved a goodbye to his still frightened relatives cowering on the sofa, and followed Dumbledore into the night. They walked in silence for a few minutes before Harry spoke at last. Sir. I feel I should apologize for breaking your things at the end of term. It was wrong. Ah, Harry. They are but things, and can be replaced. Your anger was not misdirected, and it is I who must apologize. I am human, and I do tend to forget the details when trying to help the world. I had forgotten of you as a person, and that you needed information. Especially as you are at the center of this war. Keeping it all from you was a mistake. But please understand, I only wished for you to have a chance at a normal childhood. It is clear now that your childhood had been anything but ordinary. Perhaps if I had been honest with you from the very beginning, things might have turned out very differently. But, as I said the last time we spoke, I cared too much for you to place that burden upon your shoulders. Are we okay, sir? Harry mused. I think we are. I promise that this year, you will be better prepared for what lies ahead. I would very much like to take you into private tutelage, if you are willing. Yes. That would be good. May I ask what I will be learning from you? History mostly. Ah, do not make such a sour face, Harry. We can learn a great deal from history. And this, I dare say, is very important. But now is not the time for such a discussion. This is as good a place as any. If you would take my arm. Harry reached up and took the headmaster's arm. He noticed that the hand was blackened and shriveled. Harry was about to inquire as to the cause when he felt as if he were being forcibly squeezed through a tube. That evening he had met Horace Slughorn, who would be returning to teach at Hogwarts. Dumbledore had used Harry to lure the professor out of retirement to take up his old post. Slughorn was quite a character. When they had arrived at his home, it looked as though there had been an attack, but it turned out, Slughorn was merely trying to hide. He was a large man, not in height but girth. He was completely bald but had a very bushy mustache. After a brief conversation, Dumbledore excused himself to the restroom, leaving Harry with the stout professor. Slughorn knew who Harry was, of course, and the two talked a little about Harry's mother and her talent in his class. Harry liked the man, but also felt a little wary of him. He got a feeling he was being eyed by a hungry walrus. When Dumbledore returned, Slughorn agreed to return to teaching at Hogwarts, though he made a few demands, which Dumbledore happily agreed to. As they were leaving, Harry had asked what Slughorn would be showing the students that year. Slughorn replied that he had some very interesting potions in mind. "You're a potions master?" Harry asked of the stout, portly man. Slughorn's eyes lit up with delight. "Yes, and if you're like your mother, I expect that you will be quite a genius with the subject." Before he could ask any more, Dumbledore escorted the youth back into the night, and apparate him to the burrow, where, despite the late hour, Molly Weasley was still up and awaiting them. "Now Harry, before we go inside, I must speak with you for just a moment. First I must thank you for your help with Professor Slughorn. I was unable to convince him by myself, and having him at Hogwarts is most important. You will learn why later on. Second, I believe that it is in your best interests to share with your friends all that you know. This includes the prophecy. You friends give you strength, Harry. It is a great disservice to them if you hide secrets from them. And finally, though the future might seem bleak, try you best to live and experience life and all its wonder. I plan to. Sir Sirius would never forgive me if I wallowed in my own guilt. I know it wasn't completely my fault, but I do hold some of the blame. But even so, Sirius, and my parents would be very disappointed in me if I clung too tightly to it, and let life pass me by." "Indeed. A very good outlook, Harry. I am very proud. Now, let's not deprive Molly her chance to feed and dote upon you any further." Harry had meant what he'd said, and over the next few weeks, he had finished his summer homework and really enjoyed being with his friends. He and Ron and Ginny had played Quidditch and he'd had several long and fun conversations with Hermione. Each day the four teens had tried their best to enjoy being young and free. During his stay with the Weasleys, two very curious things happened. The first was that he'd learned that Ron's oldest brother Bill was engaged to be married to none other than Fleur Delacour. Harry had been surprised, but he was happy for Fleur. Though he'd only met Bill once just before the Quidditch World Cup, Fleur had not really ingratiated herself with the Weasleys. Least of all Mrs. Weasley, who didn't seem to like the pretty blonde French woman a bit. Harry and Fleur had spent a little time together during the summer holiday getting to know each other, as they never spent much time together during the Triwizard Tournament 2 years ago. Harry came to respect the French woman who was struggling to find acceptance from the Weasley women who were making her feel unworthy of Bill. Harry had no advice to give the poor girl other than to stick it out and fight for what she wanted. Presently, Harry sat against his favorite tree, not far from the pond where he, Hermione, Ginny and Ron had spent several hours swimming during the holiday, contemplating the other curious thing that was happening to him. Ginny Weasley had changed a lot since he'd last seen her, or so he thought. He found himself staring at her for no reason, or blushing when she looked at him. It was a strange sensation to feel when he looked at the sister of his best friend, and Harry had no explanation for it. For years, it had been Ginny who had usually been unable to speak, or else doing something clumsy and embarrassing in front of him. But during the last year, she had matured, not only physically, but mentally and emotionally as well. She spoke to Harry many times without blushing, or tripping over anything. She had even dated Michael Corner. She was currently together with Harry's housemate, Dean Thomas, and she seemed really happy and Harry was happy for her. Yet, he felt a weird bitterness whenever he thought of Dean and Ginny together. Harry couldn't understand why he felt butterflies in his stomach when she looked at him now, or why he worried about how he looked before going down to breakfast. It was all so strange to him. He barely knew her, really. They'd never had any deep conversations before. Still, he found himself thinking of her often. Perhaps it was true, sometimes the very best things in life are always right in front of your eyes. Harry realized that it might be a good idea to really get to know Ginny in the coming year. She was one person who had never wavered in her support of him, and she could be trusted to keep a secret, and Harry had a huge secret, one he had yet to share with his friends. Despite Dumbledore's encouragement, Harry wanted to, but he'd not found the right time. And with the school year fast approaching, time was running short for telling them in some place where they might not be overheard. So when he looked up from the struggling gnomes he'd been absent-mindedly watching to see Ron, Hermione, and Ginny approaching, Harry decided that it was now or never. "There you are," Hermione said as they stopped in front of him. "I told you we should have looked here first." Ginny smiled triumphantly. "You were right, big deal," Ron scolded. "No need to get all uppity. You guys need to sit down. I've got something I need to tell you," Harry said quietly. The three sat down, and Harry began his tale. He was unsurprised by the various reactions. All of them were horrified when he finally revealed the contents of the prophecy, and Harry was encouraged when all three of them pledged to do whatever they were able to help him. Harry knew then that the coming school year would be very enlightening. Harry felt more prepared than he ever had. He was about to be proven wrong. September 1st arrived with its normal excitement and chaos in most wizarding households, as students went through the motions, and packed, repacked. Check and double-check that they were prepared to board the Crimson Steam engine at King's Cross Station. This was the case at the Greengrass Manor where Daphne, and her younger sister, Astoria settled their trunks in the entry hall of their family home, and donned their traveling cloaks in preparation. Daphne was going to meet her best friend Tracy at the train station. They would find a compartment as usual, and then, when the train was underway, she and her friend were going to find and speak to Harry Potter. Over the last weeks of the summer holiday, Daphne's anxiety had grown in leaps and bounds, and now as she stood awaiting her parents, she was visibly shaking with nerves. Her younger sister held her tongue, understanding the intense pressure that her older sister had been placed under. Astoria, for the millionth time this summer, thanked whoever watched over them that her parents had not entered her in a marriage contract as well. "Daphne, are you going to be all right?" Astoria asked with concern. Daphne eyed her sister suspiciously for a few moments before nodding her head stiffly. The truth was she was actually thinking of avoiding everything to do with Harry Potter and the stupid contract, and just continuing on with her life as if this had all been a seriously bad dream. After all, one could pack a lot of living into 3 years. There were so many things that cautioned her against even speaking to Potter. The first being how her housemates would react. Daphne had never truly cared about what her housemates thought, mostly due to the fact that they let her be. She had never been the center of scrutiny, and she had worked hard to keep things that way. Daphne thought that maybe Tracy had a good idea at waiting until they were out of school and approaching him then. Yet, Daphne knew that her biggest mistake had been in revealing her situation to her best friend. Tracy was nothing if not persistent, and Tracy loved to see people squirm. Though her sights had never before been set on Daphne. Tracy had been writing all summer since she had gone home from her visit. She had come up with dozens of different ways in which to approach Harry Potter and revealing that they were intended to be married. None of which had been remotely helpful. "Well, have you both got everything together?" Mrs. Greengrass said as she joined her daughters. Both girls nodded dutifully, and their mother embraced them both. "Well, let's get going." Mr. Greengrass smiled as he waved his wand, shrinking his daughter possessions, and sticking them in his pocket. The journey had been very normal, passing through the Flow network to Diagon Alley, where they entered into Muggle London to catch a taxi cab to King's Cross Station. The platform 9 3/4 was its normal bustling frantic self, with hundreds of students running to and fro, saying goodbye to their parents and saying hello to their friends. Astoria, a girl around 13 called, running up to Daphne's sister and embracing her warmly. She said hello to the elder Greengrass, and after a quick goodbye, Astoria and her little friend disappeared into the mass of students and parents. "Are you to meet Tracy here, or on the train?" Mr. Greengrass asked. "Here. She should be here soon, if she isn't already." Daphne nodded, still scanning the crowd. "Daphne, may I speak with you a moment?" Mrs. Greengrass asked. Daphne followed her mother just a little way away from where her father now stood watching students come through the barrier. "We've not spoken of it since that night, but I wanted to ask what you intended to do in regards to your situation with Harry Potter," Mrs. Greengrass said softly. Daphne felt herself stiffen in anger, and she glared at her mother. "Why are you so concerned about it? Isn't it all wrapped up? All that is left is for you to gift wrap me and hand me over, right?" Daphne snarled. "It isn't like that, and you know it, young lady," her mother shot back. "I think you'll find, if you can ever get past your narrow views, that you are the one who stands to gain from this arrangement, not your father or me. Mother, no one enters their child into a marriage contract unless they get something out of it. Why can't you be honest and just tell me what it was?" "Because there is nothing to tell." "When did you become so suspicious and paranoid?" "About the moment I found my own family had sold me off like cattle to the highest bidder." "Goodbye, mother, give my love to father." With that, Daphne stormed away from her obviously concerned and stunned mother and onto the train. She was angrier than she'd ever been in her young life. Growing up, all she ever heard was how oppressive wizards could be, and how her family struggled to help lesser wizards, half-bloods, and muggleborns from that oppression. The Greengrass family was felt to be neutral in their political standings, but Daphne knew that they leaned more to the light. Her mother abhorred the pure-blood propaganda, being half-blood herself, and her father believed that no one should be judged on blood, but on power and talent. Daphne tried to clear her mind as she found an empty compartment, and put her things in the overhead rack before sitting down to await her best friend's arrival. Several people poked their heads in her cabin, and quickly left, realizing the Ice Queen had claimed that cabin. Daphne always felt a twinge of sadness that she had so few friends, but her experience in Slytherin House had proven time and time again that you could trust very few people in life. It was almost like the house bred bullies and degenerates. Daphne had witnessed all manner of oppression from older students to younger. However, the majority of hostilities was saved for the other houses, especially Gryffindor's. Draco Malfoy had been the biggest bully of all. Since his second year, Malfoy, with the help of his father, had positioned himself as the King Serpent. Even older students feared crossing him. Nearly every Slytherin fed information to him regarding whatever his interests happened to be at the moment. Daphne despised Malfoy vehemently. He was a stuck-up braggart with very little real magical power. It was true that he was a quick study and picked up new spells fast, but there was little power behind it all. Daphne also despised her fellow Slytherins for not seeing that Malfoy was a puffed-up peacock. She knew if he were ever exposed for the weakling he truly was, no one would ever listen to his prejudiced diatribe ever again. Unfortunately, his name carried a lot of weight, and no one dare cross the Malfoys. Daphne's train of thought was broken when Tracy entered the cabin as perky as ever. "There you are," she huffed. "I've been looking for you for 20 minutes. I thought we were going to meet on the platform and look for Potter." "I'm sorry. I didn't have a very good farewell with my mother and father. I had to get away from them. There's still time to go look for him." Daphne sighed. "No. Let's just wait for the train to get moving, and all these children to settle in. It'll be easier to approach him. Especially when Granger and Weasley go to the prefects' meeting." The girls sat in relative silence, speaking softly to one another as was their custom during school. They had learned to speak near whisper since their first year, to prevent people from overhearing them. They had also perfected the cold stare. A look of frigid indifference that made the focus of their gaze become uncomfortable and eventually excuse themselves. Ever since third year, that look had guaranteed them a cabin to themselves on the train. At exactly 11 o'clock, the Crimson Steam engine, known as the Hogwarts Express, sounded its whistle, and began its journey north. There were shrieks of joy in the corridor as students greeted each other on the train. Both Daphne and Tracy watched from their cabin as first years passed, looking simultaneously frightened and awed by the goings-on. About 20 minutes into the trip, Pansy Parkinson and Millicent Bulstrode stepped into the cabin and greeted their dorm mates. Pansy had finally grown out of her ugly duckling phase, or her parents had ponied up the gold so their child could visit with the magical world's finest beauty experts. Whatever they had done, Pansy now looked quite attractive. Her dark hair was silky, and cut in a very flattering style. Her clothes were doing everything they could to accentuate her new curvier figure. Now we'll never get her to shut up about how great she thinks she is, Daphne thought sourly. "Hello, Davis, Greengrass. How was your holiday?" Pansy simpered. She still believed herself the leader of their clique, though both Tracy and Daphne knew that there was no such clique. Pansy would seek them out, shadowed always by Millie, who was nice when Pansy was not to be found. Pansy would follow Tracy and Daphne around, always trying to keep herself in front to appear as if she were leading them. Pansy worked very hard to keep up the farce for the whole school and herself. "Pleasant as always." Daphne spoke stiffly. "I sent you an invitation to visit, why didn't you respond?" Pansy smiled tightly. "As usual, your owl left before I could respond." "As you know, I'm sure. My family has no owl. Father uses the flug, or delivery owls. He won't let us have an owl, he feels they're too messy. Daphne lied easily. Too bad. Millie and I had a marvelous time this summer. Tracy glanced at Millicent, who looked bored and a little sad. Tracy could tell that Pansy's idea of marvelous would have been a very long tirade on how beautiful she was and how marvelous a match she would be to Draco Malfoy. "Excuse me, Pansy, but aren't you still a prefect?" Tracy asked. "Yes, and I must be off. The meeting will be starting soon. I will catch up with you ladies a bit later on." She gave a silly little wave and left them to their privacy. Millicent looked like she might smile until Pansy called for her to join her. Millie gave a sad little sigh and dutifully followed Pansy out and down the corridor. "Poor Millie," Tracy said when the door shut. "One day that poor girl is going to pay for mistakes she had no choice in making. I do hope she opens her eyes before that." Daphne sighed. "She's so nice." Tracy stared at the closed door. "Well, shall we go find your future husband?" Daphne glared hard at her friend, who smiled back as if she'd just done well on an exam. Daphne finally shook her head and rose out of her seat, smoothed the front of her skirt and led the way out of the cabin, followed by Tracy. "When we find him, I do all the talking, got it?" Daphne said, spinning to face her friend, who had the good sense to look fearful. Tracy nodded her agreement and the two girls began searching for the elusive black-haired boy. Daphne led the way through the train, peering into every window, searching for the Gryffindor golden boy. They found him in the last car of the train, sitting with Neville Longbottom and a rather odd-looking blonde girl, whose name Daphne did not know. It looked like Longbottom and Potter were engaged in a quiet conversation, while the blonde seemed to be engrossed in her magazine. Daphne took a deep breath and opened the door to the cabin and stepped inside. "Excuse me, Longbottom, but I need to speak with Potter privately," Daphne said rather forcefully. Neville looked rather embarrassed and surprised by the appearance of two attractive Slytherin girls. "Whatever you have to say to me can be said in front of my friends," Harry said defensively. The black-haired Gryffindor was obviously angry already. Daphne couldn't think of what might have put the boy on the defensive already. They were only 20 minutes into the journey. Daphne looked to Tracy, who could only shrug, and then to Neville, who still looked apprehensive. The blonde girl never moved or made any indication that she had heard anything at all. Daphne realized she was in a tight spot and had a decision to make. "It's rather personal, Potter, and I doubt you'd want what I have to say getting around," she tried. "Just say whatever you have to say and leave me alone," Harry nearly shouted. "Fine," Daphne huffed, folding her arms across her chest. "I was given a bit of news this summer, and I feel obligated to share it with you. It seems that you and I are betrothed." Harry looked up at Daphne with a look of confusion. "It means you're going to be married to her," Tracy said. Daphne spun and looked angrily at her friend, who shrugged. "I know what it means. I'm just trying to see how this is funny." "It's a rather bad joke, really." Daphne sat across from Harry, next to Neville, and crossed her legs, resting her folded hands upon her knee. "I assure you it's no joke. It seems my parents entered into an agreement with your family just after I was born. There is a contract that stipulates that you and I are to be married." There was silence in the cabin for a long, tense few moments. "A marriage contract?" asked Neville. Both Tracy and Daphne turned on him, causing him to redden slightly. Neville did his best to calm himself as he continued. You could have just slipped him a love potion. It would have been much easier than trying to convince him you're destined to be married by contract. You don't seem to be getting this. This is not a joke. It's not a prank by me, so much as a prank on me. There is a marriage contract between the House of Potter and the House of Greengrass that says that Harry Potter and I are to be married. I'm told this contract resides in the Potter family vault. My parents informed me of it this summer in hopes that you and I, Potter, would spend the next 2 years at school getting to know one another so our marriage wouldn't be so uncomfortable. Daphne shivered as she spoke the last bit. Let me get this straight, Harry said, leaning forward in his seat and staring into Daphne's dark brown eyes. She had often heard other girls speak on Harry's piercing green eyes, but she'd never experienced his probing stare before. As he looked into her eyes, she felt exposed. As if he could truly see inside the most secret parts of her soul. It was almost nice, except the boy was angry and his eyes seemed to pulse with that anger. Daphne actually felt a little fear creeping up her spine, though no one could tell as she remained perfectly impassive. You're telling me that you and I are obligated to be married because our parents arranged it just after we were born? When is this supposed to take effect exactly? By my 19th birthday. Not a lot of time to plan a proper wedding, is it? Tracy snickered. Both Daphne and Harry glared at her. Why should I believe any of this? Harry asked. Don't believe it? Write to Gringotts and get a copy of the contract. We'll go over it together. I'm very interested to learn of the arrangements and what my family gained from selling off their firstborn child. All right then. When this contract arrives, I will come find you and you can look at it. Until then, you and the rest of your serpent's pals can stay the hell away from me. Harry growled. Daphne stood, smoothed out her skirt and gave a slight nod of farewell. She and Tracy left the cabin and Harry slumped back in his seat. It's a lousy joke, Neville said softly. I'm sure Malfoy put her up to it. I suppose we'll know when Malfoy comes by for his annual trip visit. This seems a bit amateurish even for him. What if it's true? Marriage contracts haven't been done in a very long time. I've not heard of one in the last 20 years at least. I really wouldn't worry. Though if there was one, you could do a lot worse than Daphne Greengrass. Is that who that was? Harry asked a little interested. She's the one all the boys call the Ice Queen, right? Yeah. She never dates, always studies. She is second in our year behind Hermione, you know. He family is quite old too. Everyone thinks they're dark, but my gran says that they just keep up that facade in order to stay safe. She says that Mr. Greengrass is a very good politician, or he would be if he were on the Wisengamot. Why isn't he? Harry asked. Gran says they'd rather stay out of the public political arena. She says there's more money changing hands behind the scenes. She reckons that's how the Malfoys have remained so powerful. Malfoy. Harry seethed. He still had no idea what his enemy was up to, but he was sure it wasn't good. He had not been able to convince Ron or Hermione that Draco had taken the dark mark. During their trip to Diagon Alley to get their school things, Harry, Ron, and Hermione had followed Draco into Nocturne Alley into the shop of Borgin and Burke's. It was there that they overheard the blonde Slytherin prince demanding things from the shop's owner. Harry was convinced that Draco Malfoy was now a member of Lord Voldemort's supporters and was plotting against the school, and Dumbledore. His friends, however, did not share his suspicion, believing Malfoy to be far too weak to even be considered for service by the Dark Lord. And he was most likely trying to throw his weight around using his family name. This disagreement had caused a lot of strife between Harry and his friends. "I heard that Daphne and Tracy are outsiders in their own house," Neville said, breaking Harry from his thoughts. "So?" Harry asked, a little annoyed. "Well, after what you told me about Malfoy, it could be good to have someone on the inside. Someone who dislikes Malfoy." "I get it, Neville. I doubt she'd be willing to spy for me, though." Harry sighed. Ron and Hermione joined Harry, Neville, and Luna a little while later, where they shared that Malfoy was no longer the Slytherin prefect. Apparently he resigned the post and now Theodore Nott is the new prefect. Ron said disdainfully. Harry's mind began thinking of all the reasons why Malfoy might resign his position of power over lower year students, and Neville's suggestion began making sense. However, he just couldn't think of a way to get the Ice Queen of Hogwarts to help him. "Well, while you were at the prefects' meeting, you missed quite the bad joke." Neville started when Harry glared at him, silencing him. Harry couldn't really think why he should not talk about Daphne's visit, and now he would be unable to not talk about it. "What's going on?" Hermione asked. Luna answered before Harry got the chance to brush it off. "Harry is betrothed to Daphne Greengrass from Slytherin House. The blonde fifth-year Ravenclaw didn't even look up from her magazine, so she missed the death stare that Harry gave her." "What?" both Hermione and Ron yelled. "It's just a really bad prank," Harry tried to say. "Malfoy obviously put her up to it." "What did she say?" Hermione demanded. "That's disgusting. Who'd want to be with any of them?" Ron asked to no one. "Actually, if they all looked like Daphne Greengrass, I'd not say no," Neville said thoughtfully to himself. Everyone looked at him, and Neville slumped a little in his seat, face burning scarlet. "Daphne Greengrass?" Hermione asked, confused. "She doesn't hang around Malfoy. Why would she take part in something so silly?" "She's very intelligent as well as quite attractive, so the boys all say. I even heard Fred and George comment on her several times." Ron looked insulted at Hermione's observation. "She told me that there was a marriage contract in my family vault at Gringotts." "I don't even have a family vault," Harry said, still trying to brush off the whole incident. Hermione turned so quickly to face him that Harry swore she might have hurt herself. "Don't be so sure, Harry. When we were at Sirius last Christmas, he mentioned to me how old your family was. I wouldn't be surprised if there was another vault or two for you. Many of the oldest families have several vaults in Gringotts." "Why wouldn't I know about it then?" Harry was beginning to get angry over the topic. "Harry, sometimes I wonder how you've made it so far knowing so little. Perhaps you should ask Dumbledore about it all," Hermione suggested, giving him a meaningful look. "Maybe because no one ever tells me anything," Harry said angrily. "Everyone keeps secrets from me to protect me, or whatever." "Calm down, Harry. Just ask Dumbledore when you get the chance." "I'm sure he'll tell you now." Hermione tried placating her friend. Harry sighed and faced the window. He'd had a very strange day, and it was only just past 1. "Excuse me," said a timid voice from the doorway. A small boy who looked like a first year stood shaking in the door, his hands wrapped around a small bit of parchment. "Can we help you?" Hermione said gently. I'm looking for Harry Potter and Neville Longbottom. I was told to give them this, the young boy said, holding out the parchment. Harry took it with a small smile and the young boy ran off. Harry scanned it and frowned. He handed it over to Neville, who looked quite confused. Who's Slughorn? Neville asked. Is he the new Dada teacher? I don't think so. I met him earlier this summer, and he said he had many interesting potions to show the students. Harry said, climbing to his feet. Potions? Ron asked incredulously. Why didn't you mention that before? It could be poisons and antidotes. Hermione shrugged. I suppose we'll find out, Harry said. He and Neville said goodbye to Ron, Hermione and Luna before trekking their way to the front of the train, where Slughorn was holding court with several other students, including Ginny Weasley. Harry was able to get a seat next to the youngest Weasley, and smiled shyly as she gave him a bright greeting. Well, now that you're here, gentlemen, perhaps a few introductions, Slughorn chuckled. Harry was introduced to several students, some of which he knew, others he couldn't remember ever seeing at Hogwarts. The meeting was more of a luncheon, where Slughorn boasted about all the famous wizards and witches he knew, and asking about several of the students' families. In fact, everyone present seemed to be there because they were either well connected or extremely talented. Slughorn talked politely, but Harry had the distinct impression of a sort of interrogation. He began to dread what things Slughorn might ask of him. He looked about the room and his mind screamed for a way out of it all. Which brings us to young Harry. So much has been written about you, boy. I dare say I can hardly believe half of it. And now all this business about a prophecy and that incident in the ministry this past summer. Slughorn smiled widely, giving Harry the impression of an extremely pleased walrus. There's not much to tell, Harry began to say, but Slughorn waved it off. So humble. Taking on Death Eaters on you own. I wasn't alone. Neville and Ginny were there with me, and there was Ginny's brother Ron, and Hermione, and Luna. Really? Slughorn seemed to perk up a little and sat forward. Harry noticed that many of the others also seemed to be on the edge of their seat, including Blaise Zabini from Slytherin House. Zabini, a tall dark-skinned boy, was eyeing Harry suspiciously as Harry opened and closed his mouth several times. 6 of you fighting fully trained Death Eaters on your own, and all for some silly prophecy. Slughorn chuckled. The rumors have been quite something to hear. You know, they're even calling you the Chosen One. Isn't that something? It's all rubbish if you ask me. Zabini smirked. I've never seen anything to make me believe that Potter is anything special. Oh, because you're so talented, of course, Ginny said angrily. This seemed to send Slughorn into another chuckling fit. Oh ho, I must warn you, Zabini, boy. Watch out for this young lady. I saw her perform the most amazing bat bogey hex. She is not one who should be trifled with, and she helped young Harry fight off Death Eaters. Not many can claim to do that and gotten away with their lives, no sir. Lunch continued, and Harry was able to deflect more question about him and the rumors flying about him. This seemed to upset Slughorn, but he kept his disappointment hidden. Finally he excused the gathered students, and they filed out of the car and back to their own cabins to prepare for arrival at Hogsmeade Station. Ginny said goodbye to Harry and Neville as she joined Dean and several others from Gryffindor in their cabin. Harry felt a tightening in his chest when he saw Dean give Ginny a kiss. A little further back, they passed a cabin in which Draco sat with his cronies. Harry wanted so badly to listen to their conversation. He would have given anything to find out what Draco was up to. Harry knew in his gut that the Slytherin prince was going to cause trouble this year, and Harry couldn't convince anyone of it. It left him with only one option, to gather proof. Harry kept on walking towards where his friends were when he felt himself grabbed and pulled into a cabin. "Sit down, Potter," Daphne said forcefully as she shoved Harry into the empty bench across from her. She sat down next to Tracy Davis and eyed him coolly. "I want to make a few things clear," she said sternly. Both girls sat with their arms folded across their chests, and Harry suddenly felt tense. He wanted his wand in his hand. Even though both girls didn't have their wands, Harry still felt uncomfortably on edge. "All right," he said evenly. "Since we've never ever spoken in all our years at school together, I can't imagine why you'd think I would stoop so low as to play some juvenile prank to get your attentions. I guess what they say about your ego is true after all." Now Harry began to feel angry at this blonde serpent. "Now who's judging who?" he asked snarkily. Daphne's eyebrow raised a bit. "To be honest, I can't imagine any girl who'd be interested in me, or why they'd go to any lengths to get my attention. In case you've forgotten, I'm marked for death by a certain dark wizard. Being associated with me gets people hurt or dead. So don't go thinking I'm going to delude myself into believing I'm Merlin's gift to women. I'm not Malfoy." Harry stood up and made to leave when Daphne ordered him to sit down once again. Harry glared at the blonde Slytherin girl, who after a moment added, "Please." Harry sat in a huff and stared coldly at the blonde girl. "Look, Harry," Daphne said, softening her tone a bit. "I had plans for my life, and while marriage was a part of that, it was to be for love, not because I was contractually obligated to do so. I need to see that contract so I can find a way out of it. I'm sure you'd rather have a choice in who you end up with, right?" Harry thought about her words for a few moments and Ginny's face flashed in his mind's eye. Harry wanted a family to call his own more than anything, but he also wanted to be free to choose who he married and built that family with. "Everyone should be able to choose who they marry," Harry finally said. "Exactly. So let's not fight over this. We both want the same thing here," Daphne said triumphantly, uncrossing her arms and leaning forward. "I'm just asking that you get hold of the contract and let's take a look at it, and see what we can do to end it." Harry stood again and held out his hand. Daphne took it and Harry shook it once and left. Daphne knew then that she had reached him and that they might be able to end this nightmare. "Well done, Daphne." Tracy congratulated her friend. "I'll even bet he writes them tonight and you'll be free of it all by week's end." "Let's hope so. Father was pretty confident that it was unbreakable, but I'm sure there has got to be a loophole. I want to apologize for making fun of you all these years for your interest in magical law. I thought you were mad reading all those books, but it may actually pay off for you." "I hope so." "Still," Tracy said wistfully, looking to where Harry had been only a moment before, "he is really good looking, and passionate. Did you hear how he spoke about you-know-who being after him? That boy is in desperate need of a good snog." "Well, feel free to give it to him," Daphne said harshly. I would never betray my best friend and snog her husband-to-be. Tracy grinned like the cat who got the mouse. I hate you. I truly do hate you. Hope you enjoyed. Please like and subscribe.